Hello, I'm Dr. Kenneth Goldberg, and I'm the author of The Homework Trap: How to Save the Sanity of Parents, Students, and Teachers. I'd like to follow up on a topic that I started on my blog yesterday, which essentially has to do with what the future holds for kids that are homework trapped. In yesterday's blog post, I focused specifically on risk of drug involvement, which most parents, worry me for sure as a parent, and and how homework noncompliance and chronic pressure over homework has an impact on the future, whether it be drugs or other issues. The reality is that kids who are homework trapped can't do their work in a reasonable amount of time. Uh, we can debate over whether that's fully can't do or whether that's don't want to do. Frankly, I think the reality of human behavior is that people do the things that uh, they like to do the things that they do well, and they develop skills in the things they like to do. It goes hand in hand. So whether it's want to or can't, the reality is still that the kid is not doing the homework. And if you watch kids that are homework trapped and their parents, they get sent into a frenzy and a very negative interaction from a young age. It usually starts in elementary school and gets more complicated in middle school when you have multiple teachers. But the reality is that parents get thrown off center. They don't use their basic judgment, and without using their judgment, it simply entrenches. It simply makes more severe the behavioral difficulties. All these parent-teacher conferencing for the homework trapped child is actually making things, creating more harm than good, and it is a lot of harm. If you talk to an elementary school teacher about your child's homework noncompliance, the teacher will often say, well, you know, it may not be that important right now, but what's going to happen in the future? And what's going to happen in the future is a question. And the reality is what's going to happen in the future is it's just going to continue to get worse. But it sort of goes with this implicit idea that in order to deal with what's going to happen in the future, the child must do the homework. People don't typically think of the alternative, which is just to reduce the demand, or if you keep up the demand and not penalize it so heavily, take away the pressure so that parent, teacher, and child can all work together as a team to try to make things better. But that's not what happens. The pressure is unrelenting, the threats are severe, and what ends up happening is parent and child get into a negative interaction, and that goes on until the child gets into high school. And high school is a very important time for kids. It's a time for learning, but it's a time for learning about relationships, learning about each other, socialization. It's a time for activities, school activities, after school activities are very important for kids. And this is where they're starting to break away from their parents and form their own groups. And things go in predictable ways. Kids will behave in ways that are similar to the mainstream. We can talk to kids about peer pressure, but kids will follow their peers, and then they eventually grow up. And by the time they hit about their mid-20s, they hit a point of maturity where they are going on with their lives. But the kid who's homework trapped, what ends up happening is that child has a much more tense relationship with their parent than they should have. They have a more tense relationship with their teacher than they should have. They're not learning as much as they should learn. And by the time they reach high school, they're starting to get excluded from high school activities. This is particularly true if the child plays a sport, because the way most state organizations work is that sports eligibility is contingent on making grades. So if the child's not making grades, the child doesn't get to play the sport. And kids are looking for peer groups. So what ends up happening is the peer groups that your child starts to find are peer groups that are engaged in more negative behavior. Now we know kids are going to experiment with different things, whether it be alcohol, drugs, sexual behavior, just doing things that may feel like they're bad or naughty or not what their parents would approve of. This is what kids do, and then they grow out of it. But the problem is that by the time the kid reaches 25, and maybe at a point where he's truly ready to go on with his life, he's hit a point of maturation or he doesn't want to engage in these negative behaviors, he may be carrying a lot of consequences. He may not have a high school education. He may or may not have a GED. He may not have the college education that he was capable of doing. He may have a child at a point that he's not ready to raise a child. And he may be hooked on something that is going to be hard to get off of. The kids that are not homework trapped, the kids that are engaged in the school, engaged fully in the school, those kids are, they may be experimenting, but they've got a little line they don't cross. They don't go over the line. They stay within boundaries. But the kid who's homework trapped may have gone over that line, and now you've got a problem because that kid has engaged in an activity, a behavior, an addiction, has received a consequence, maybe a criminal consequence. But whatever has happened, your child's been separate. Your child has now has big problems to deal with at an age when he really wants to go on with his life. And I'm not blaming this all on homework. I mean, at a certain point where where kids are going to end up having to take responsibility for themselves, and certainly when they become adults, they have to take responsibility for themselves. But the reality is, the 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 anti-drugs are the relationships kids have with their parents, with their teachers, and with their peers. And if we have constant negativity and constant harassment, constant badgering on a kid to do something that's not getting done, and we don't think of another way to go with it, and we don't stop and sit back and say, well, this homework is not well supported by the research. It's only a fraction of what the kid is supposed to do. There's no reason why people can't learn within a 6.5 hour school day, even if they miss that extra hour or whatever they're supposed to do at home. And there's a point to step back and say, this isn't working, and give parents some authority and give parents some tools to address it differently. I think the risks are high, and I think it's important in elementary school when you find you're spending hours with your kid battling over homework. I think it's time to do something different. Thank you.